Welcome to a new episode of Follow the Rabbit, where we pull up the garage door to our research process and show you how we do it, and how the sausage is made, and how we put together
Tofu
our
sauce.
research. Tofu sausage. And seitan sausage. How we put together signals and develop our insights. And the funny thing is, if you remember our last episode where I talked about a third place connected to the university in Karlsruhe, that's actually where I'm coming to you today. I'm sitting in an intro cafe, visiting some friends here. But today we want to dive into a new but related topic to third places that has a lot to do with what happens when we actually looking for third places when we travel. And Igor, you have done a lot of research into that. Take it away.
Indeed. I mean, research is also field research. That's basically what Johannes is doing. Retesting our assumptions by embedding himself into the actual context. So, yeah, I mean, this is where we left off. The whole concept of third place has been discussed over the last couple of videos, and we wanted to kind of see where does it take us further. And we kind of, I mean, I don't think it's a term. I actually didn't Google it yet, but third place as a service, if you heard it here first, this is ours now. And the thing is, there is actually some really new stuff happening in that context, and some stuff is quite old. And so I think it's not necessarily like proper trends in that term that are happening out there, but it's basically things that are happening under the radar, things that are mainly really relevant if you're part of a specific industry. And maybe some of those things are just a way of describing certain behavior that would not otherwise be described in that terms. And one of those terms is actually, I mean, it's a bad one, really. Bleisure. It's business and pleasure. In a way, I hope that it will never really kind of like become a big thing, because there's phonetically really very few words out there that I would like to exist. But Bleisure is one of a really bad one. And funny enough, Bleisure, I remember it quite vividly. We were engaged in a really big project for the trade fair in Munich in 2019. And in a collaborative workshop with a lot of stakeholders, including the CEO, we talked about Bleisure as a really driving force, because obviously the trade fair being in Munich and also having a really big kind of like trade fair center in China, in Shanghai, was really concerned whether or not customers will be influenced by eco-consciousness and basically start traveling less to trade fairs. And we really dived deep into this topic. And to be honest, at that time, while it was a term already from 2007, actually from the Future Laboratory book, I think that was where it was coined first by Jacob Strand, and shout out to Samantha Culp to pointing it out. The thing is, like, as an eco-conscious travel trend, it was never really that big. But after COVID, it became actually quite a lot bigger. And the reason here being is that it became more egoistic and less about kind of like the question of whether or not this is like a sustainable goal. So basically what happened is that people, because of the pandemic, once again, couldn't travel. When they could, they wanted to travel as much as possible. And that's connected to a little trend that we'll be discussing in a second called revenge travel. And started basically talking to their employers and saying, well, if I'm going on a trip, I want to connect it to something that is for the business, but also for me personally. The thing is, like, one of the reasons why Bleisure was really, really complicated was, well, lawyers. And more specifically, it was a little bit complicated to allow, for example, employees to take their families with them. It still is, but there's a lot more work being done in that context. Compliance issues. One is it like tax problem. How do you ensure people when they're traveling, basically when the company has booked you on a trip, they're kind of also responsible for you. Those topics are all solvable, but the incentives for employers to solve them was not really there before because eco-consciousness wasn't driving that much pressure onto them. But with COVID, obviously, a lot of things that used to be really, really complicated became suddenly possible, like working from home, giving everyone a notebook to work from home, or enacting completely new policies that allowed employees to say, well, you know what? If you can enact this policy, you can probably enact that other policy that allows me to take my family onto a trip. And so there's basically a lot of stuff happening, like basically skilled employees that you need to hire or keep in your company that suddenly start motivating companies, employers, to figure out how to solve those problems. And again, this is all very much connected to the fact that revenge travel, you probably did it without, calling it revenge travel. But here's basically a word that you don't have to memorize because it's already kind of waning a little bit depending on the metric that you're looking at. But basically whatever we all did, so you suddenly could travel, at least without feeling too much guilty about it. You started traveling as much as possible. Some people did it very consciously in the sense that they tracked how much money they didn't spend on travel during the pandemic years. Other people started doing that really kind of unconsciously, and it also connected with Bleisure, the trip, the other part, where people started going on trips for their businesses again, and then kind of like saying, well, I mean, at least we can combine the fact that I had to travel to a different location, stay longer, do something for myself, really kind of like the emphasis here also became really about this kind of like feeling good about myself, feeling good about the fact that I'm going on a business trip, kind of like in understanding what I need as a person to be able to perform the best as I can on a trip like that. And I think it's kind of interesting that those kind of like very personal trends are forcing basically the industry to change. And there's like individualized kind of demand for certain things, and it kind of forces employers to change, it forces but also the service providers to change what they're offering. And I think that's how it's connected to the third place kind of aspect of it, is we are seeking on in every part of our life this third component that enables us to perform the best, feel good about ourselves, and really understand that work isn't everything, and that we need kind of like escape capabilities kind of like from the fact that we have to perform in a certain way. And one kind of like really big topic, and I think that probably those two topics will have a little bit more legs than Bleisure, is wellness travel and holistic tourism. And if you kind of like think about the episodes we did before, holistic is that term that always kind of came back into the conversation. Like third place is that part that basically makes us whole, like that we need to connect like the first and second place, but the third place is that thing that really creates kind of a holistic experience for us. And what it actually is very much dependent on who you are and what your kind of like context and situation is. But generally kind of like that triumvirate of things that are connected seems to be in place. And again, wellness tourism is really, really like, it's a really big term. Like it's like the Global Wellness Institute estimates that it's going to be a $640 billion industry, which is a really big number even if you have no comparison to it. what I found in that context really fascinating is that what kind of destinations became really big after the pandemic was over. Basically, like destinations that had some spiritual kind of like component to them, like people went on pilgrimages, they went to kind of like holy places a lot more than they used to, which again brings us back to that aspect of third places being like the thing that connects basically our worldly life to some meaning. Like we are basically performing in our first and in our second place, but the third place kind of like is that thing that gives us that meaning and kind of like takes care of something that is missing in some aspect of our life. And it's again, that's kind of like holistic tourism. Like that's where I also got it from. Like wellness tourism is holistic tourism. It's that connection of creating experiences that are really kind of like focusing on giving us all that we seek as a service. I also love that idea of climate adaptive wellness as a side note, like basically going to places that help us cope with climate change, which is, a little bit insane and contradictory, but still there it is. But holistic tourism, there's a really great paper actually there, and it's from last year. And it discusses basically like what is the motivations and what are people actually seeking. And I would like to read basically that thing. A recent essential product in the tourism industry is holistic tourism. It is based on the need to get away from the daily grind and stresses of our life, the pursuit of continuity and a sense of well-being, and the pursuit of genuine gestures to rekindle the individual's unique identity. So it's a lot about finding ourselves. It's really kind of like identifying. The trip in itself is the point of really finding myself. And the only way to do this is to really kind of like get that experience that allows us to get there. And there are like, sports and physical activity, obviously, we discussed this as well, like gyms being kind of like now co-working spaces and mental health spaces and nutritional kind of like consulting spaces. A lot of hotels and really retreats invest a huge amount of money into developing the kind of like sporting activity that supports those ideas. It's a lot about giving us the space, but the equipment that we need to exercise at any given time. But I also just basically like wanted to cluster it a little bit more. Like, so basically, what do we want when we talk about holistic experiences? And it's kind of like that transformative spiritual experience, like basically really not just being a consumer, but really getting to a point where we confront ourselves with certain things in our life, but in a way that allows us to function when the trip also ends. So it's kind of a little bit like tricking ourselves into being that other person that we need to be to also be able to afford that kind of authenticity. And wellness is a really big thing. Obviously, wellness, we discussed it already. Authenticity is about, well, I don't know. Like for me, actually, authenticity in that context is a little bit about suspension of disbelief. It's believing in that thing. I don't know if there is such a thing as authenticity anymore. I think it's about really kind of like understanding that you are able to immerse yourselves in that context. And I think that's connected to that idea of developing specialized products. So basically allowing you to not choose during this process, allowing you to just kind of like book something and experience the whole thing without being confronted with extras or an ability to be kind of like, can I afford this? No, you want to take care of this before and not deal with money when you get there. I think that experience, that kind of like really focus on customer experience is really, really important in that context. And obviously, who is this for? Affluent tourists, obviously, like those trips are not cheap. But there are other people basically refocusing your budget differently, like health conscious consumers, will go on different trips. So you might skip a city trip to somewhere or another trip that we would have taken otherwise, and focus a lot of more of your budget on trips that are enabling you to feel well longer. So it's not just escapism in that kind of sense that you're just going to some other place. It's about really refocusing the budget that you have on your health and really making sure that you can take care of yourself. And then obviously culturally inclined travelers, and that's connected to the sustainable and responsible travel as well. So I think people are less inclined to kind of like go on trips that are culturally exploitative. So there's a huge backlash in Indonesia, Bali, and so forth about that thing. Like people used to travel there without really considering what it actually means for the local communities, for example. And that becomes a lot more of a topic. They want to make sure that at least some of that money that they're spending with those localities are actually going back to the communities to rebuild infrastructure and to give back. Whether or not this is actually happening, I have no idea. But I think it's from a customer point of view that's becoming a really important part. And when I kind of like mentioned the develop specialized products, I think that's really connected to the kind of enhanced customer experience, like really making sure that you can suspend your previous kind of life and really immerse yourself into that context. And a crucial aspect, and I think that's been discussed a lot, the hospitality industry is having a really hard time getting the necessary staff to maintain a really high quality, because staff used to be paid really, really badly in the hospitality industry. And I think for an industry that wants to kind of sustain and really increase those kind of experiences, they really need to refocus on investing into staff. And I think from what I see, from what we can see, this is just a growing trend. There is like a huge demand on all levels of income to provide those kind of experiences. It's a lot less about fragmentation in the experience itself. There are different ways of experiencing that, but like what you want is to make sure that a trip is good for all aspects of your life. And I think that's a really big one. And I think like in a way, like that escape from this reality thing is really connected to something that we've seen in another aspect. This is a little bit less thought through, but it's kind of like a really interesting kind of signal that we found during our research is, so a place that's been really affected heavily by COVID restrictions is China. And China generally really changed for the worse in terms of being able to communicate, really meet people. It became a lot more like a dictatorship during those years. And a lot of Chinese people were really fed up and left China. And one of those destinations has been Thailand, specifically north of Thailand, where people started really moving to Chiang Mai and really build up Chinese communities in there. I think the Thai aren't necessarily only just happy about that, but let's, ignore that part for a second. The reason here is that basically you can take trips to escape reality, or you can escape reality and take trips back to that other thing that you did because you're still a citizen of a certain place, or you have responsibilities because you have family and so forth. And so it's kind of an interesting thing where, and there are a bunch of stories of people basically saying they moved to Thailand. I think like that quote, moving to Thailand has allowed her to have a multiverse version of herself where she can be a farmer, an influencer, a businesswoman, and a single child-free woman away from the pressures of Chinese society. And obviously China is a very specific kind of case, but that affects all other like Western societies as well in a somewhat different way, but they're also very similar kind of like needs that people have in Western societies as well. And it comes down to social, intellectual, and spiritual kind of like needs that we see being unfulfilled in our everyday lives. Hence all the trips from the holistic tourism industry that we need to take to make sure that we kind of like get what we need, even if our daily grind isn't allowing us to have that. And it all connects to that kind of holistic understanding of ourselves. And the way kind of I'm thinking about this right now is like, what happens when rebundling and unbundling are the same thing? Like basically what you need is kind of get away, unbundle a lot of opportunities for yourself, really kind of be the farmer, the influencer, the business person, that like you can be a lot of different things instead of just one. And basically allow the multiverse version of yourself to exist, because fragmentation is the only way to have a complete life. And so that kind of like idea of a third place, it's really kind of like about finding what kind of like places will fulfill the needs that you have. But at the same time, those spaces only will allow you to find what you need, because it's a chicken and egg problem kind of thing. And which just brings me kind of back to, and I want to finish on this, like that quote from the essay that we're kind of like still remotely connected to, is that obvious opportunities to build a new religion. And I think the religion part is a lot less relevant. It's about building a new kind of like world order, in a way, about what it actually means to be, and how do we kind of think of ourselves. How are we tied to locality? Because we need those places. Places can be services, it can be ideas, it can be kind of all kinds of things. So yeah, obviously that's a really big one. There are some really concrete examples, I think, that we found really interesting. And that idea towards the end is a little bit more fuzzy, obviously, but I think there is, from a consumer customer need point of view, really something super exciting happening both in the tourism industry, but also I think it's a good signal for everyone else to understand that there is something missing in our life, and we tend to get what we want in the end.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting like intersections on topics like community and identity and things like that. For me, it's really fascinating to listen to you, because I am right now living exactly that. I am away from Berlin. I'm here for work. I do a couple of workshops, but also the usual thing would then to, if I'm not in a workshop, then I would be like at a hotel or maybe a cafe, but very like in like a bubble that's not really connecting to the city that I'm in. But I'm not right now. I'm at a third place, like a cafe that is also connected to a university, that has events, that has a community, that a lot of people who just spend time here. And if you spend one day here, you will start to connect to them. You can just come here and have conversations. And so I have a very different like relationship to the city. I'm much more connected to it than to people who just spend time here. And for them, it's their home city. For me, it's a home away from home. And I find it interesting, like this notion of, I think what we've realized through the pandemic is, because I think for a lot of us, it felt like hitting pause, like we were just stuck and things wouldn't move on. And we are realizing that it was the same for like our identity or the complexity of identity. It's just like we're stuck in a place, and that also means we are not moving forward mentally. Like I think it's a very human thing that we grow and develop by moving, just by like being and I think that's what I really had to think when you talked about travel and identity, and I travel to learn about myself or to explore new aspects or to just get new inspiration and think, actually, I don't like this so much anymore. I'm like this more now because I've seen a different thing that hasn't been on my radar before, or never heard about, or something like that. And that's why always this old notion of like you have to travel to develop as a human comes from, and we've learned that very much through the time we weren't able to travel. And I think that's a huge part for me, and I think that's a really interesting aspect. Is like multiverses of ourselves being like identified, experienced, fine-tuned, and learning to live that we don't have to force them into one identity, but they can actually be in different aspects of a slightly different person if I visit my grandmother than if I'm working the people that I'm working with or something like that. So it's always been there. The other thing that also I find really interesting is that like being on the move, how hard it is still to do sports. I mean, that was like for me like one of the main things that draw me to running, because it is the easiest thing to do wherever you are. You just put on running shoes and you look at like Strava or something like that, or even like that. You just look at the map and see where is it nice. It seems to be nice and green when you can run there. But if you do anything else, like even just, I found out all hotels have gyms and they probably don't have the equipment that you're used to. It's tough to, or also very expensive. Just go to a gym for one day. You have to find the right one. You have to, don't know if they have like towels or everything. It is actually quite hard to keep healthy on the move. And I think that's for me is like one of those aspects that I find most interesting, where I hope this trend or this development will actually change a lot in the coming months and years. And where I find it interesting because I'm suspecting from everything we looked at through this series is how new players will come into this space of offering, like having an understanding of travel. Like we talked about the Telegrafenamt Hotel in Berlin that actually opened a membership club for their fitness space for people around them in Berlin. I wonder, like the other way around, like will gyms offer more to travelers who come from outside, who don't have an ongoing membership, but who are interested and willing to pay for a good experience to do that? So that could be one aspect where actually a new player comes into the space of like travel offerings, something like that.
Well, maybe one way of looking at it is to kind of watch closely what kind of investments are being made by hospitality groups and really understand. I mean, they're obviously like gym basically chains. And it would be interesting to see whether gym chains would acquire some hospitality kind of contexts that allows them to kind of cater to customer needs. But vice versa, also hospitality groups investing more into kind of gym chains, because basically whenever you are able to, and I heard this, for example, last week from someone who runs a really big hotel in Berlin, the group that owns the hotel is offering kind of a membership for healthier food. And kind of it's funny because she assumed that it wouldn't work, but it went through the roof. And the reason for that is because people really care about healthier food, but at the same time, it also allows them to basically, I have this membership already. I'm more likely to book in that group context. Basically, it gets you sooner into the funnel. It ticks the box in terms of customer need, healthier food while traveling. Also, how hard it is to kind of like maintain or get like a good gym. It's also not easy when you travel to eat healthy, or I mean, it's easier than it used to be, but it's still not just straightforward. And so it was kind of funny because it's like allowed them to get people into that funnel. But also the thing is, for me, ambiguity is the goal. Like that's what I meant with the multiverse version of itself. But it's really like it's an abstract thing, and it's really, really demanding still on the individual to figure it out. So on a societal level, we have no way of dealing with that. I think on a societal level, the only comprehensive idea that kind of remotely explores ability is universal basic income, and basically like as a hypothesis to say, well, what would people be doing with their time if they would not need to take care of their basic needs? And I think in a way what we're seeing right now is also an inflection point pointing towards that in a way, because it says I cannot maintain whatever I'm maintaining right now on an individual level. I need some ways of dealing with the fact that a lot of the time that I'm spending is not actually good for myself. I need to pretend that I'm happy. I need to do all kinds of things to make sure that I have enough money to pay my mortgage or pay rent in a big city. And I think there is a lot of people are happy with doing that, like doing that work and also going on really expensive trips to kind of like counterbalance for that. Good for them. That's, I think, a fair game. But I think what it does hint is actually that there's something beneath that kind of happening. And it reminded me a little bit. So Carl Chaika was on Ezra Klein's podcast a few months ago, and they talked about a lot of different things, obviously, about his book, Filter World. But it kind of like, there's a term that they mentioned, personalized culturescapes. And I think that's what's happening right now. Like basically like everyone, like we need individualized versions of community experiences, which is kind of like just like really weird. Like the fragmentation is real and we're kind of seeking very different things individually, but when we arrive there, what we are actually more happy about is the community aspect, like the thing that connects us to something real, like basically grounds us into reality, and gives us that meaning. Like that's why people go to spiritual places. Basically, it's that like finding meaning in something that other people found meaningful before you gives you an ability to cope with the world. Like you send the sense of wonder and so forth. And so I think there's like, I mean, it's not a conclusive thing, but it's like obviously something is bothering us. Like something is really, really unsettled, kind of like in a way. Like in the pandemic, it produced it. It just revealed it and accelerated it. The same way that, you know, globalization was revealed by the fact that like how few things it requires to get like, you know, trade to collapse very quickly. It's that really like high entropy and very rigid world that we built for ourselves, and we kind of want to rethink it, but we are not quite sure where to start, and so we focus first on ourselves, because that might reveal something about what we want, not just for ourselves, but for, you know, how we see the world.
That's why I find it interesting to bring it back to third places, in the sense of the most important thing that they are about is community, because that is exactly the place where it is not just you. And I think this is also like, again, what is changing about travel is that it is not you, the traveler, moving through a world like a distant observer or something like that, but like really being part of that. And you don't have to in a place to connect to a community, but you can still like connect to it, and see like how it changes your view of what you have to give. And
You know what's funny? Like, I mean, when Kyle and I kind of like coined this airspace term, And it was a little bit like derogatory in a way, because it was like saying, well, look how everything is so similar everywhere. But the funny thing is, in a way, it is really helpful to me. Like, because when I walk into an airspace cafe, I basically, it looks all the same. They have similar beans, but at least I know that those are my people. At least I know that I will be able to talk to the person behind the counter, because it's likely that they know some of the beans that I like. It's likely that they know some of the people that I know as well, because I'm connected a little bit to the coffee community. And it kind of like the aesthetic aspect of it allows us to have a common denominator. So it's not all bad, right? It's a way of really making...
You have a common starting point. Because it's not. It's also like these people are not all the same. They are all not like exactly the same coffee or the thing. But it's like you have something that we can start from, and then we can actually say, oh, what you do here, and then you talk about like what are other like roasters and baristas are doing in the city, and how do they connect to other things in the cultural sphere of a city and things like that. It really is like it's like a jump start into the more local aspects of a neighborhood, a community, a city that actually helps you with that. Like, I think this is this interesting dualism between a global aesthetic thing, or the stuff that Kyle really talks about in Filter World, like it feels like a flattened culture. But once you dig a bit more into that, you understand, like, yeah, it's a common denominator that has very local expressions of that, and there's a difference in that. That I found really interesting.
Well, maybe we'll dive in our next episode a little bit deeper into the aesthetics of those kind of things. So, I think like a worthwhile thing to pursue.
Sure. So, thanks for coming along in our little rabbit hole here. See you in the next one. Thank you so much.
Bye.